The cannons emerged from the water like twin shadows of reckoning, and the fishermen on the shore knew their boats would never sail again. In the coastal waters of Kanto, where the rocky cliffs meet the endless blue horizon, there exists a creature that commands respect from every living thing that calls the sea home. Blastoise, the shell Pokémon. A being of tremendous weight and power, standing taller than most humans at over 5 feet. Its body a fortress of muscle and armor, weighing nearly 200 pounds. The water's edge habitat along Kanto's rugged coastline has been its domain for generations, and the old fishing villages have learned to read its moods like sailors read the wind. The elders speak of Blastoise with reverence. They say that when threatened, it crushes its enemies beneath the sheer weight of its shell. They whisper that in desperate moments, it retreats into that impenetrable armor, becoming an immovable stone in the current. But what truly sets this creature apart are the twin high-pressure water cannons mounted on its back. These hydro-reactors can launch devastating torrents with enough force to punch through steel plating. An imposing Pokémon, the old texts call it. A title well earned. Our story begins with one particular Blastoise, who had claimed the waters near Vermilion Harbor as its territory for nearly 15 years. The fishermen called it Old Current, though never to its face. They respected its space, and in return, it tolerated their small boats and modest nets. A fragile peace built on mutual understanding. That peace shattered on a morning when the sky turned copper and the waves began to churn with unnatural fury. A massive cargo vessel had run aground 3 miles offshore, its hull torn open on the hidden reef that Old Current knew better than any map could show. Black oil began to seep into the crystalline waters, spreading like poison through the veins of the sea. The fish fled, the smaller water creatures scattered in panic, and the delicate ecosystem that had thrived under Old Current's watchful presence began to die. "Something must be done," said Marina, the young marine biologist who had been studying the coastal Pokémon for 2 years. She stood on the dock, watching the dark stain spread across the horizon. The cleanup crews won't arrive for days. By then, the damage will be catastrophic. Old Current surfaced near the harbor wall, its eyes fixed on the distant wreck. The torrent ability that flowed through its blood stirred something ancient and powerful. When pushed to its limits, that ability would amplify its water attacks beyond normal capacity. But this wasn't a battle that could be won with force alone. The Blastoise dove beneath the surface, swimming toward the spreading contamination. Its powerful limbs propelled it through the murky water as it assessed the damage. The oil was moving faster than expected, carried by currents that seemed almost malicious in their direction. Toward the spawning grounds, toward the nursery waters, where countless young creatures depended on clean seas for survival. Old Current positioned itself between the oil slick and the vulnerable shallows. It raised its cannons and fired, creating a massive wall of pressurized water that pushed back against the advancing poison. For a moment, it worked. The oil retreated, dispersed by the tremendous force. But water alone cannot destroy oil. It only moves it. The slick reformed, thicker now, angrier somehow, and Old Current felt the first tremors of exhaustion ripple through its muscles. The Blastoise had lived long enough to know its own limits. A sustained assault like this would drain its energy within hours, and the oil would simply flow around any barrier it created. Marina watched from her research boat, her instruments tracking the Pokémon's vital signs through the sensors she had tagged it with months ago. Heart rate elevated, energy output unsustainable, and in the creature's movements, she recognized something that made her own heart ache. Desperation. Old Current needed help, but the very isolation that had made these waters a sanctuary now became a prison. The nearest Pokémon Center was hours away. The fishing boats were too small to make a difference, and the cargo ship continued to bleed its poison into the sea. Then, from the depths of the harbor, a sound rose up. A call Old Current had not heard in over a decade. The sound of its own kind, answering. They came from the deep channels beyond the reef. 3 Blastoise, who had once shared these waters before, territorial disputes drove them to distant shores. Old Current recognized them by the patterns of barnacles on their shells, by the particular rhythm of their movements through the water. These were not strangers. They were family, in the way that creatures who survive together become bound by something deeper than blood. The largest of the newcomers, a female whose shell bore the scars of countless storms, positioned herself beside Old Current. No words passed between them, for they needed none. The language of their kind was written in posture, in the angle of their cannons, in the synchronized beating of their powerful tails. But the oil would not wait for reunion. This Slick had found a gap in Old Current's defense, a narrow channel where the current pulled the poison toward the spawning grounds with terrible speed. Marina's instruments screamed warnings as toxicity levels spiked in the shallows. The young creatures there had minutes, perhaps less, before the contamination reached lethal concentrations. Old Current faced an impossible choice. Maintain the barrier and watch the channel flood with death, or abandon the main defense and let the larger mass of oil advance unchecked. 15 years of protecting these waters, and now it would fail them in their darkest hour. The female touched her shell against Old Current's flank. A gesture of solidarity, yes, but also something more. A reminder. Old Current had always worked alone, had always believed that strength meant self-reliance, that asking for help was admitting weakness. But watching the poison spread, feeling the exhaustion in its muscles and the despair in its heart, the ancient creature finally understood what the sea had been trying to teach it all along. The strongest current is not a single stream. It is many waters flowing as one. Old Current turned to face its kin and lowered its cannons in the gesture of cooperation that their species had used since before humans walked the shores. The others responded instantly, positioning themselves in a formation that the old fishing texts called the tidal wall. 4 sets of hydro cannons aligned in perfect synchronization. When they fired, the ocean itself seemed to bow before them. The combined force created not just a barrier, but a vortex, a spinning column of water that trapped the oil within its center and held it suspended above the waves. Marina watched in amazement as the torrent ability manifested across all 4 creatures simultaneously, their attacks amplifying each other in ways her instruments could barely measure. The oil could not escape the prison of pressurized water, could not spread, could not poison. They held that formation for 6 hours, through the heat of midday and into the golden light of evening. Timid shouters. When the cleanup crews finally arrived with their specialized equipment, they found the contamination contained in a perfect sphere of churning water, the 4 guardians of the coast standing sentinel around it, like living monuments to determination. The spawning grounds survived. The nursery waters remained clean. And Old Current learned that the shell it had built around its heart was far more confining than the armor on its back. In the weeks that followed, the 4 Blastoise did not return to their separate territories. They remained in the waters near Vermilion Harbor, their old disputes forgotten in the wake of what they had accomplished together. Marina documented their behavior with growing wonder, watching as Old Current welcomed the others into the domain it had guarded alone for so long. The fishermen say that some Pokédex entries suggest the water pressure from those twin cannons can reach forces strong enough to punch through steel plating. But the elders who witnessed that day speak of a different kind of strength entirely. They say that Old Current's greatest power was not in its cannons or its shell, but in its willingness to finally let others share the weight of protecting what it loved. The copper sky has long since cleared. The oil is gone, cleaned and contained. And in the waters where the rocky cliffs meet the endless blue horizon, 4 ancient guardians swim together, their shadows moving as one beneath the waves. Some battles cannot be won alone, and some victories are measured not in enemies defeated, but in walls torn down. Dive deeper into the world of Pokémon. Subscribe for more amazing creature features.